I sat alone in my office staring at the divorce papers on my desk. My hands felt cold even though the heater was working fine. Signing those papers would mean the end. 10 years with Claire gone just like that. But before I could pick up the pen, the door opened and Claire walked in. My wife. She wore her long brown coat and her hair was tied back the way she always did when she was serious. Her eyes looked calm, but I could see there was a storm behind them. I said, "You are early," trying to sound normal. She said, "No, you were late like always." She came closer and stood in front of my desk. Her fingers touched the edge of the papers, but she did not look at them. She said, "I want something one last night." I looked up at her and said, "One night." She nodded and said, "No lawyers, no shouting, just you and me. One night to talk, to remember, maybe to say the things we never said." I did not expect that. I thought she was done with me. I thought I had pushed her too far. I asked, "And if I say no?" She said, "Then tomorrow we are just two strangers signing our names and walking away. But if what we had was ever real, even for a short time, then we should end it with truth, not silence." I looked at her. My heart was beating fast. I said, "All right, but there is one rule." She raised her eyebrows and asked, "What rule?" I said, "No lies, just honesty, even if it hurts." Claire nodded and said, "Okay, truth." We left the office together. And I did not know why, but something inside me felt lighter and scared too. We walked to a small cafe near the river. We used to go there when we were dating. It was the same small tables, soft music, warm smell of bread and coffee. We sat at a corner table by the window. Claire smiled a little when the server brought her favorite chocolate cake. That smile hit me like a memory from another life. She asked, "Do you still remember this place?" I nodded. I remembered every detail, but inside I was a mess. My chest felt tight. I was holding a secret I could not keep anymore. She looked at me with serious eyes and asked, "What happened to us, Adam? You shut me out. Why?" I looked down at my hands and said, "I did not want to hurt you." She said, "You already did. I need the truth." I took a deep breath and said, "I am sick." "Claire, really sick?" She looked at me confused. I said, "I found out about a year and a half ago. It is brain cancer, stage 3. I did not tell you because I did not want you to go through it. You already lost your father and your younger brother. I did not want to be the next goodbye." Claire was quiet at first, just blinking like she was trying to understand. Then she said in a broken voice, "So instead you made me feel unloved, like I was not worth the truth." I said, "I thought if you hated me it would be easier when I am gone." She stood up and said, "I need some air." I followed her. She walked across the street to the small bridge over the river. We used to go there when we could not sleep. It had been years since we stood there together. I walked up behind her and placed her coat over her shoulders. She said, "You were worried I will catch a cold, but you were ready to leave me, wondering what happened to us." I said, "I was scared, not of dying but of making you go through it with me." She turned to me, her eyes full of tears and fire, and said, "Love is not about protecting each other from pain. It is about facing it together." I lowered my head and said, "I did not want you to see me weak." She reached out and took my hand and whispered, "You do not have to be strong alone. If we still mean anything to each other, let us face it together." My chest ached, but not with fear this time. It was relief. That night was not about fixing everything. It was about remembering who we were, and for the first time in a long time I felt like I was not carrying this alone. After that night with Claire, everything started to change. We did not sign the papers. We did not talk about divorce anymore. Instead, we talked about appointments, treatment plans, and small chances. The next week we sat together in a clinic waiting room. Claire held a notebook filled with questions I never even thought to ask. I was scared, but her calm, steady voice made it feel less impossible. She asked, "Are you okay?" When she saw my hands shaking, I said, "I am now, because you were here when the doctor came in." Claire took charge. She asked about side effects, diet, sleep, mental health, recovery time. She was not just listening, she was preparing to fight, not for herself but for me. That day I realized I had never been alone. I had just shut her out. From then on, Claire became everything I needed, even when I did not know how to ask. She woke up early every morning to make light, healthy meals. She drove me to every chemo session. She sat beside me when I could not sit up. She read to me when my head hurt too much to focus. She held me when the pain was too much. Sometimes I tried to put on a brave face, but she always saw through it. She would say, "You do not have to pretend with me, let me carry it with you." There were nights I could not sleep. The fear, the sickness, the weakness, it all felt like too much. But Claire would sit at the edge of the bed, running her fingers through my hair, whispering stories from our past, places we had gone, things we had dreamed of. She reminded me we had lived a full life and we were still living it. One quiet night when the rain tapped against the window, I turned to her and said, "Claire, I want to begin again." She looked at me and asked, "What do you mean?" I reached into a drawer and took out a small velvet box. Inside were our wedding rings, cleaned and resized. I said, "I do not want to fix the past. I want to start something new right here, right now." She looked at the rings, her eyes wide, tears already falling. She whispered, "Are you sure?" I said, "I am sure about you. You have been my reason to fight. I want to spend The rest of whatever time I have showing you what that means. She nodded and said, then let us start again. We placed the rings back on each other's fingers. It was not about continuing, it was like being reborn, a quiet promise to hold on, not because we had to but because we still wanted to. In the weeks after that I grew weaker. Some days getting out of bed felt like climbing a mountain. My body did not feel like mine anymore, but Claire never treated me like I was less. She laughed with me when I had strength. She cried beside me when I could not talk. She helped me through the darkest hours with nothing but love in her eyes. One morning while she was in the kitchen making tea, I gathered my strength and said, Claire, there is one more thing I want. She came over and asked, what is it? I said, there is a place I would like to go just one more time. She knelt beside me and said, where? I said, the hills, that old spot with the wooden bench. You remember? Her smile was sad, but she nodded and said, of course I remember. It was our secret escape, a quiet place outside the city where we went when life felt too loud. Open sky, soft wind, and the sounds of nature. That weekend she drove us there. The air was cooler, fresh and clean. We walked slowly up the path. She helped me every step. I did not have much strength left, but I was determined to reach the top. We sat on the bench together, no words, just silence. The sky turned gold and orange as the sun set. I looked at her and said, thank you for staying, for choosing me even when I was at my worst. She took my hand and said, I made a promise, Adam, and I meant every word. I leaned my head on her shoulder. I felt the warmth of her body and heard the soft wind through the trees. In that moment I was not afraid anymore. I knew the end was near, but I also knew something more powerful. I was loved, not because I was strong, not because I had anything left to give, but because she believed in the kind of love that stays. I do not know how many days I have left. Maybe a few, maybe more, but I know this: she gave me peace, not by changing what was coming, but by never leaving my side. And when my last breath comes, I will take it knowing I was never alone.